Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the ProTech Knives TR-5 Assist version. First off, though, in the name of full disclosure, I want to thank ProTech for sending this guy along. I handled one of these guys at Blade West. I said, oh yes, yes. As soon as you get more of these around, let me check one of these out, they said, of course. But as always, I told them I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. It might be a gem, it might be junk. They did still send it along. Nonetheless, we do have to assume this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the nature or the quality of my review. Next thing, let's do some size comparison for you real quick, and we're going to find that this is actually not a particularly small knife. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2, as well as the Spyderco Delica. And what we're going to see here is that in terms of handle length, we're actually not that far off the Delica here. This is not particularly huge in that way, and in terms of sharpened blade length, just a little bit longer, right? So it looks a little bit bigger than it actually, I think, is. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2. And so, yeah, what we see here is, in terms of sharpened length, we are almost the same. PM2 is a little bit bigger, but this is markedly smaller in the handle, etc. And then actually, here it is against a couple of ProTechs here. Here it is against the ProTech Knives Malibu, which is, it's sort of twin, but in a very different way. Here it is against the ProTech Knives Runt number 5 and the ProTech Sprint Ultimate Custom, which I'm going to be real here. I just wanted to show off a little bit. And what we're going to see is that this is larger than both of these knives. But actually, why on earth would you have a knife this small? Well, the biggest answer is California. I live here in the California, and in California we have a very, very dumb law that says that any automatic knife is limited to being under 2 inches or such. Now, of course, talk to your lawyer, not a YouTuber, anytime you're dealing with knife laws, because they are irrational and unevenly applied by design. But at the same time, the biggest thing that this knife has going for it is you might be looking at this and going, ProTech TR-5, oh, okay, cool, it's an automatic knife. But yeah, watch this. Nothing's happening. Unlike most of ProTech's automatics, where when you press the button, it goes, boop. This guy does not have that. Instead, to open this knife, you press here. You press this thumb stud. You push it out, and then oh, it fired all right. This fired very, very strongly. This is not an automatic knife, though. In most places, and again, talk to your lawyer, not a YouTuber, one of the relevant characteristics of being an automatic knife is that you are pressing on the blade rather than pressing on a button on the handle or some other surface, and therefore, for most definitions, talk to your lawyer, this is not an automatic knife. And so, as a result, this is a very different piece, and this is something that is very legal to carry in a lot of places where the regular ProTech automatics are absolutely not legal. And it, by the way, is also an assisted knife. This contrasts with the ProTech Malibu here. This is a manual knife. If I start to bring it out a little bit, there is no additional force acting on the blade here. The only thing that's pushing this open is the action of my finger against that tab. As opposed to on this guy, where there is very much a force. If I start to bring it out here, it is pushing constantly against my hand. It will lock up very naturally, and in fact, I need to apply some force here to get it to close back again. This is an assisted knife. There is a spring pretty much identical, I gather, to the spring in their normal sorts of automatics, but it's just using a detent here, so you have to press it open with the thumb stud rather than with the button. And you should watch my disassembly to see how that system works, see what that what that detent looks like. Also, if you watch my disassembly, you're going to see a couple of little tricks, like there's a hidden screw under here, and this backspacer only slides off from one side. So anyways, enough of that. Let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting, very unusual knife from ProTech. So to start with, on the good side, this guy is made just up the way from me in near LA in the California, here in the US of the A. And of course, quality is about effort rather than geography, but it's always nice to support the home team. And especially ProTech, they are a group of very, very kind people. Maybe there's a jerk hiding in the back of the shop somewhere, but I haven't met him yet, right? The ProTech folks are always a joy to work with, Dave and the whole family over there. They're excellent folks. And so it brings me a lot of joy very personally to interact with people and to buy, products from and to work with folks who are really kind people, right? I love seeing kindness in the world. And, so the fact that it's made in the States is nice. I've seen their shop. I've done a tour. I've watched them make the parts, right? But it's also really nice that they're good folks. And so those are probably both a little forms of bias here, but at the same time, I try to take that into account. But I do like supporting nice people, especially nearby. So that's good. Next thing, size-wise, this is actually quite nice. Some of the TR lineup, which is tactical response, the tactical response lineup can be huge, right? Some of those are gigantic. This is not particularly, right? If we measure this guy up, we're running around 3.25 inches or so worth of blade length, and this is actually quite carryable, right? If we put this up against the Delica, we see that this isn't, markedly larger than the Delica here. It's a little bit on the thicker side, just because, well, there's a lot of mechanism in there, so to speak. But at the same time, this is a perfectly reasonable size, and it has enough blade for pretty much any task, but at the same time, it's not so huge that it becomes a pain to carry. This is quite carryable. So there's that. Next thing, this guy has a very interesting detent. I'm going to see if I can put a little light on the subject here and show you what's going on in there. But again, watch the disassembly video if you are curious about exactly how it works. But if you look inside there, there's like a little half-moon spring right there, and then there's a little post attached to that spring on either side. That little detent, what it effectively does is it slides into a little groove that you can actually see right there. It slides up into that space and kind of up onto that. So when you're closing the knife, it's spring, 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 and then there's this little moment here where I am pressing a little bit harder to get that detent up and onto that little tongue. And now at that point, that detent bar is kind of trapped on this little claw thing. And in order to open the knife, I need to exert enough force to push those springs up and allow the knife to then fire off. So there's it's a very different detent than usual. It's not like the little, the arm with the ball on it going to the hole. This is a very different sort of thing. It's sort of, how was I just doing that? Yeah, it just kind of grabs onto it, and then after a while, you give enough force. But it's kind of a neat little detail, right? And it seems like it's pretty easy to adjust, and I love, frankly, seeing a different system. It applies no lateral force to the blade, so there's not centering issues. It feels like an innovation, and in fact, this is a Matt Lurch design. I want to be very clear about that. That's this particular approach is very, very cool. And, frankly, at the end of the day, though, the important part about it is that it allows the knife to basically feel like a ProTech TR-5, except instead of hitting this button, you hit this one, right? It feels just like anything else until that very, very end, where you have to close it. Just that last little step, right? And so as a result, it feels every bit like an automatic. It fires every bit as reliably as an automatic. It's just not one, right? And the detent on it, the assist on this guy is actually still pretty functional, right? Because you can, for instance, with a lot of assisted knives, if the springs are really crazy strong, it's difficult to close one-handed, but this isn't particularly. It's a little bit fine motory, certainly, but at the same time, it's not that hard to get everything, closed back up with one single hand, right? And there is no safety required on the knife because, frankly, this requires a goodly amount of force to deploy. For some people, actually, the detent might be a little too strong. But there's not a separate safety required. So all you really ever have to do is press the thumb stud and it fires out. So I think that this is actually a very nice assist in a number of ways. I mean, it feels every bit like an automatic, right? It feels like ProTech seems to be very proud of their snap action. And this is another good example of it, right? And so at that level, I gotta like that. The other nice thing about it being a side fire is that it is still very easy to subtly deploy. You just grab it and you open it up like so, and no one's the wiser, right? It still looks tactical as all get out, but this is a much sort of more subtle way to deploy the knife in a lunchroom with Irma sitting there at the table eating her prunes or whatever Irma's eating. Relative prunes, really? But anyways, relative to a lot of your other choices where it's like, oh my God, weapon, right? That's a detail. Next thing, this does have a lot of texture, right? This is the tactical response. And as a result, there is a fair amount of tactical texturing here, in addition to the texturing provided by the relatively chalky black aluminum that I'd love to give ProTech grief for. But you also get texturing along this back bar right here, which helps keep this in your hand. You get texturing up here, which is nice. You get texturing down here, you get a little bit, the clip is also, as well as these finger grooves, mean that this really isn't going anywhere in the hand. This is definitely favoring retention over comfort a little bit in terms of ergonomics and grip, but it is definitely there. Next thing, this does actually have a glass breaker on the back of it. This little portion here, this is a hardened steel backspacer, and these little corners on the edge here are left sharp on purpose so that you can use this and crack glass, right? And it's actually pretty ergonomic to do so. You wrap your thumb around the top here and you grip, and then you just give her hell. well. Mind you, I didn't go out and break a bunch of glass in preparation for this review. I don't tend to have a lot of glass around that needs broken, but at the same time, that is a thing. But it is pretty ergonomic to use, and for some people, that might be a big pro. Then finally, on the good side, this guy has a nice blade to it. This is S35VN, which is an absolutely good-to-go sort of steel. It is using 0.13 stock, which is not completely out of line. It has a relatively thin edge. It's not the thinnest thing absolutely ever, but at the same time, it's more than fine, and especially on something that is tactical response. This is going to be absolutely good to go. So, to me, all of that is the good, is that it has a nice blade, a glass breaker on the back, plenty of texture. It can be subtly deployed with two hands. It's got a functional assist that, it feels fine, and is easy to one hand still. It feels like a ProTech it's got an interesting detent, a good size, and it is made in the States by some nice folks. On the great side, honestly, the thing that makes this guy interesting is that it puts the TR series in the hands of folks who can't purchase automatic knives for whatever reason, right? Ultimately, having handled the TR-5 and having handled this guy, they don't feel that different. This has the same powerful snap-opening action. This has that same feeling of this is going to come open no matter what happens sort of thing. Really, the only difference between the TR-5 automatic and this guy is the presence or absence of the locking lever, which you don't need on this guy. The detent is strong enough, and which button you press. If you press here, it's an auto. If you press here, it's the thumb stud. And to be fair, you don't press it down, you press it out that way, right? But nonetheless, this is very much a TR-5. The only difference is a little bit of extra resistance on close and that little extra. So as a result, though, I think that's a beautiful thing because it allows this lineup potentially. Right now, it's just the TR-5, but it could allow this entire lineup to become accessible to a group of people who never, for instance, folks with stupid automatic knife laws, who never could have had one of these guys before. And I think it gives the same kind of experience even in those kinds of situations, with many fewer legal entanglements about shipping, etc. So to me, that's what's great here, is that this is effectively an automatic TR-5, but for folks who have laws that prevent them from owning or shipping, etc., an automatic TR-5. So I think they did a really good job at basically giving us the same experience, but making an end run around those laws. Mind you, the laws are irrational anyways. They need to be end run, but still, that's a thing. So to me, that's what's great. On the bad side, to start with, how the heck is the TR-5 smaller than the TR-4? Guys, come on now. And neither of them, by the way, the TR-4 is actually 4 inches. This should be, no. Make model numbers meaningful, people. Come on. Next thing, why is this only a thing for this particular model? All right, I'd love to see this kind of detent mechanism done more regularly, right? It'd be nice to see the TR-4 done in this particular treatment as well for folks who are gigantic and high-speed low drag, right? Or, for instance, the SNG, I think, would be another really nice candidate for something like this. I mean, this would be a really good way for them to make ProTechs that are automatic and ProTechs that are legal in most places and offer a little bit of each. I know they have limited capacity to make them, but at the same time, dude, this is good. Make them. Along these lines, though, the availability has not been super duper regular. Unfortunately, this has been a little tricky to get. And so I'm hoping that they continue to make more and more of these. But for the moment, they've got a batch of them going. But who knows when the next batch is going to come around? That's a little bit on the downside. This would be a very nice thing to have as a regular option out there. Next thing, the price-wise, $260 with S35VN is not super impressive, and it's also $30 more than the automatic version. And given this is unique, it's made in the States, and you're paying for that, right? You are paying for the ability to get a pretty famous knife, the R5 here, in a form that you can actually afford. But it's not super strong value in light of the competition. Mind you, there's not many other places doing exactly this, so okay. But at the same time, value-wise, this is not the strongest contender ever. It's a thing to consider. Next thing, ergonomics are not amazing for me. And given this is probably somewhat hand-specific, anytime you put in grip scallops on a pocket knife, you are making strong decisions about where the fingers should go. But things like the clip in the back here definitely reduce the ergonomics a little bit here. As does this backspacer here, which is kind of a little bit sharp along the edges here. This is going to be fine and good to go in gloves and things like that, and that's probably what it's intended for, given that it is a tactical response. But at the same time, I feel like this is not ergonomically amazing for me. Could be very much better in somebody else's hands, but for my relatively smaller hands, not so great. Next thing, the disassembly on this guy was Oh boy, that was rough. And there were a couple of reasons for that. I mean, to start with, one of the screws is hidden. You've got a screw here, you got a screw here, a screw here, and then there is a separate screw hiding underneath the pocket clip, which was quite the surprise for me. Then there's also a locating pin in the back, which is a very good idea, but it means that you really need to make sure that you are lifting this directly off. And then you've got two different springs. In practice, this was not necessarily amazing, and ultimately, the disassembly made no appreciable difference, right? One of the nice things about an automatic action is it's going to reliably deploy anyways, and the amount of resistance that you face from putting the spring back in is going to far overwhelm any improvement that you might get from taking it apart. So unless you have this guy absolutely chock-a-block full of sand and epoxy, which, by the way, is a bad idea, don't do that, you're probably not going to need to disassemble it on a regular basis, and I would generally recommend against it. That was a little bit rough. Also, the fact, by the way, that the back spacer only, is permanently attached to one side, so you can only pop the back, this panel off from one side. So it was a little bit awkward, right? Whatever, not the end of the world, but disassembly did not recommended here. Next thing, this is tactacular, right? This is the tactical response, and so it makes sense that it's going to be a little high-speed, low-drag looking, but at the same time, this is going to have a very low lunchroom acceptance factor, particularly with the pop-open, particularly with all of the other various things. This is a very tactical sort of knife. And it adds in other things like the hardened steel glass breaker, which I can totally see making sense if you're going to be busting out windows on a regular basis, but at the same time, it doesn't make all that much sense for me. You just end up with a kind of sharp and raw corner at the top here. It doesn't make all that much sense in my daily life, right? This part is fine, but this just ends up rubbing against things and could very easily end up breaking some glass. Well, okay, you'd have to be really weird to go about doing that, but at the same time, I don't necessarily need that. As a result, it's a little less than ideal. I'm paying the tactical tax effectively, having that on there. And then the detent on this guy does make it a little harder to close than the automatics, right? Because there is a constant spring force, right? The spring is constantly putting in force. So there is no point at this where it is fully manual action. But there comes a certain point right about here where I need to push markedly harder. It's kind of a two-stage spring. One level it goes here, and then it stops. You don't have to stop. You just keep pushing, but you need more force to bring it the rest of the way in. It's not a bad thing, but it is a little bit strong, right? And if somebody has a particular strength issue in their hand, they might find not only deploying the detent is a little bit strong, but it is, and by the way, one thing that's worth noting is that this thumb stud here is not the most comfortable thing ever. Kind of wish they went with something a little bit wider, maybe a little lower even. This kind of digs into the finger a little bit. Maybe better with gloves this way, but I kind of like a wider, lower the thumb stud there. That would be good. But anyways, if you have hand strength issues, this might actually be fighting you in a very meaningful way, as opposed to something like the Malibu, where the only thing you need to, to deploy it, press here, and to close it, press here and let gravity help you out. This is a much less, much lower fuss sort of issue. This feels like the automatic, and that's the joy of it, right? But if you're looking for something that's easy to open and close, you might go with the button lock versions instead. Well, there's not a button lock version of this. There's just yeah. Although actually a button lock version of this would be pretty fire, right? Oh man, actually that'd be great. Just lose the spring and make a Malibu style TR-5. Yes, do that. But anyways, I digress. And then finally on the bad side, and there was a little bit of play when this guy is fully locked down. It's not the end of any particular world. It's kind of a micro amount of play, but it is definitely there. And if I get it tightened down to the extent where that play is not present, then the knife doesn't want to reliably deploy. So it just feels like something's a little tiny bit out of whack here, right? And that's not something I'm a big fan of. And so to me, all of that is the bad, is that there is a little bit of play when the knife is closed. The detent makes it a little bit harder to close, especially if you got hand strength issues. This is absolutely tactical response, and as a result, Edna in the lunchroom's going to get scared. The disassembly is rough. The ergos aren't amazing. The price isn't super impressive. The availability hasn't been super regular. I'd love to see this detent mechanism in other models. And how the heck is the TR-5 smaller than the TR-4? People, come on, get with the program. Ugly front, nothing particularly ugly here. The disassembly wasn't great, but at the same time, it was tractable, and especially now knowing how to take it apart, if I could have watched my video ahead of time, it would have been pretty easy. But at the same time, yeah. So there's nothing particularly ugly here. And ultimately, my conclusion comes to this is a ProTech TR-5, right? And that's not a bad thing to be, right? And it's USA made. It's got a nice size with a unique detent, which leaves this guy working like any other ProTech except for part you press. It's got good texture, a glass breaker in case you're attacked by a window, a nice blade, and it offers the TR-5 to an audience who won't legally be able to pick one up, right? That is a very nice thing. I'm still not sure why this is smaller than the 4. I'm not sure why this only exists in this particular model. Availability is a little bit spotty, and they could sell a ton of these. Price isn't particularly amazing, although, again, where else are you getting this? The ergos are kind of, for my hands. Disassembly was a process. It is very tactical. The detent does make it a little bit trickier to close, and there was a little tiny bit of persistent play that I wasn't able to make disappear, but on the whole, I've liked it. It's actually a very great little tool. It is decidedly tactical. This is the highest speed, lowest drag I have felt in months, right? This is a very, very tactical response thing, and for many, this is going to be a pro, right? For many, it's like, yeah, heck yes, oh yeah. And if you're out in the field operating operationally, then 100%, this could be a nice choice for you. It could be a pro for you, but for me, it's not so much as much, right? It's a fine everyday tool, but, for instance, I don't necessarily need the glass breaker on there. I am not regularly mugged by Philip Glass. Like he mugs you over and over again, just a little different each time. Sorry, music joke. But anyways, and it's a little bit low on lunchroom acceptance factor as a result. There are definitely going to be times where I might not bust this guy out in full, whereas with some other knives, for instance, I imagine this guy isn't going to have that same issue, right? But at the same time, I totally see why some folks like and really swear by the TR line from ProTech, right? It is a seriously tool, and it is seriously well designed. But it is a very different tool now with this detent on it, right? Because it opens up big parts of ProTech's lineup to people who might not have been able to enjoy their work before. ProTech is a great company, but they have sort of the pro and the con of most of this stuff being automatic. That's amazing if you like automatic knives, but if you don't like autos, then by God, it's kind of a wasteland for you, right? Or if you like autos, but you can't get them where you live, there's not much you can do. And so I really like the fact that this is able to go in a lot more pockets than it used to have been able to do. And frankly, it's a smart mechanism too. I hope they take it, run with it, and put it in a couple of the other pieces in their lineup. So if you've been waiting for one of these ProTech TRs that you can actually own, but you've got dumb laws that have been, preventing you, this is a great way to do it, right? This finally puts one in your pocket and in your collection. This also, as an aside, shows just how dumb knife laws are. Right? If pressing here rather than here is the difference between a felony and a daily tool, then clearly you are not thinking clearly, right? Come on, people. And not only do automatic knives have benefits for folks with disabilities who might have difficulties getting a knife to fully deploy manually, but we are all safer when our laws are based in reality rather than fear. And our society grows more just when we repeal laws that were often historically created and are still disproportionately used to target certain populations who might be more likely to get stopped and checked. I tend not to go into politics, but everybody should be in favor of repealing these laws, no matter where you stand politically, right? This is there are good arguments on all sides for taking these away. So this is why I support folks like Knife Rights and AKTI who are trying to get these dumb and fear-based laws completely repealed, right? That is not about the knife itself. The knife is great, but ultimately the reason it has to exist is because of these dumb laws that are often, they just drive me a little bit crazy, right? And so I kind of long for a future in which this model doesn't need to exist, but I'm glad it does in the current one. The question that I'm going to get, and that I've gotten a lot already, is, well, hey, Nick, I could carry the automatic version. Should I get this one instead? Well, in practice, that decision's a little bit tougher because the auto is actually a little bit easier to close, right? Because there you have the same amount of spring tension all throughout until you click in the button. Here, there's that a little bit of additional force that's required. And the mechanism of the auto is a little bit simpler, albeit with that safety that you want to think about there. You're also saving $30 by going auto relative to this, which makes sense. There's more machinery going on the inside of here. So generally, if the automatic thing isn't a problem, I'd probably gesture you that way. But it is worth remembering that here in the U.S., these laws often vary state by state. And so, when I lived in Michigan for a while there, after the auto laws were repealed in Michigan, if I drove down to Ohio 45 minutes away, boom, felony. So that might be a factor for you. And if you're regularly traveling, this is almost certainly going to be a much easier choice, legally speaking. Again, talk to your lawyer, not to a YouTuber. Just saying. But anyways, your feelings here, I think ultimately you're going to come down to your feelings on the TR-5, right? It is a solid knife for a certain niche. And there is a reason it is a much-loved model from ProTech. But it's not going to be for everybody either, right? This is high speed. This is low drag. And the price, I think, is going to keep this from being an, oh my God, everybody go out and buy this knife, along with the assist, which can be illegal in and of themselves in some places that are just extra dumb, right? But nonetheless, it's great, but you kind of have to want this specifically. If you've always wanted a TR-5, but you could never get one because of stupid laws, this is going to be an absolute shining gem for you. And it is a great knife, and it is a really fun one to have in the collection. But if you don't love the knife's design, or if you can buy the auto instead, then I don't know, maybe this little guy might end up leaving you in the lurch. Okay, anyways, there you go. I hope I protected you from, I don't know, making a bad purchasing decision. Although, a fine purchasing decision. Anyways, I hope this has been interesting to you. I'm gonna cut bait before I end up doing that. So have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day, and I hope this video elicited a tactical response in you today. Bye now.